The story of the Sauk Prairie and the former Badger Army ammunition plant is one of a community coming together, seeking common ground, trying to do right by the land, its people, its history, and its future. It's a story full of twists and turns, comedy and tragedy, setbacks and breakthroughs. It's the story of citizens discovering their connection to this place and to each other. It's the story of so many people trying to work for positive change and finding themselves changed in the process. And it's a story that continues to unfold every day. Like so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, you drive by on Highway 12 and look off to the east and you'd see this strange landscape, these old buildings and this factory out in the middle of cornfields. And it was a mystery, as it was for so many others.
What we have here is the opportunity of 100 lifetimes. Together we have the chance to reach out and touch the future in a way that few people ever can. If you think about our national park system and the people who set that up for us, those people are long gone, but we still have the gift of those parks today. That's the kind of opportunity we have here at Badger, because this is unique. It's the largest portion of undeveloped land still remaining in southern Wisconsin.
I think if you care about the land, you are a conservationist. And often we conservationists find ourselves in the position of fighting against negative trends and impacts on the land. But at Badger, the conservation community saw a rare and important chance to come together and to work toward a positive vision, to turn a place with a long history of loss, pain, and degradation into a place of renewal, beauty, and reconciliation. A first meeting, and it was in December of 1997, up at the International Crane Foundation near Baraboo. And many of us work in conservation all over the state of Wisconsin, around the country, even internationally. And here was an opportunity to think about applying those same ideas and skills and relationships to a piece of our own landscape here at home. So after that first meeting, I stepped up to be the volunteer chair of this new coalition. One of the very first calls that I made, in fact, was to the Ho-Chunk Nation. The Ho-Chunk Nation, whose ancestral territory we are in here, who had a strong interest in the future of the Badger Army ammunition plant. And it was really important to start that conversation, to understand how the Ho-Chunk viewed this piece of property and what their interests were. Good
afternoon. My name is John Greendeer. They call me Mashuska, or White Feather, where I'm from. I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation and a member of the Deer Clan. Today I was asked to share a little bit about a place that we call Mawakanchunk, or the sacred earth, the sacred land. And on the other side, Dewakanchunk, they would call the sacred lake or spirit lake. We've come to discover how important that this piece of land, which the old ones we'll call the flats, served as our epicenter in a lot of places where, you know, if you take a look at our communities in La Crosse, in Madison, in Wisconsin Dells, and Baraboo, and Tomah, this was a thoroughfare through our state for Ho-Chunks to settle. 4 main villages within the 20 miles, a number of effigy mounds just within walking distance from where we are today, medicines that only grew in this area, plants, wildlife, habitat, number of homes that lived, that were dwellings that were on the side of these bluffs that they used for protection from the weather, or on the south side to gain as much of the warmth as we could.
The idea of prairie restoration at Badger is not new. In the late 1970s, Dave Fordham, the commander's representative at Badger, essentially the plant manager, often volunteered to collect prairie seeds for the nearby International Crane Foundation and the Aldo Leopold Foundation. In return, Badger was provided a share of the seed collected, and Dave Fordham facilitated prairie plantings along Highway 12 outside of the Badger fence.
Dave Fordham identified parts of the plant where prairie restoration and prairie planting could occur. He also allowed for great things like bird surveys and wildlife surveys.
Dave and I are skiing out at Devil's Lake, and he says, "Charlie, I want to share with you a dream." There's a lot of badger that's not being used for anything, and I would like to restore that back to some native habitat like prairie. That was the winter of '96. What came out of that is a group that we called the Sauk Prairie Restoration Council, SPARC, S-P-R-C. And over the course of the next 2 years, I facilitated a process to create what was called the Preliminary Restoration Plan for 1,300 acres of the badger plant.
In 1997, as discussions about the future of the soon-to-be decommissioned badger ammunition property began, Mary Yackel and Virginia Metcalf, our two prairie godmothers, gave life to the vision being developed by the conservation community. They determined that the vision must somehow be depicted visually to get the message across to the community.
The role of the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance has changed considerably in its 20-year history. It started out obviously promoting an idea, a vision.
Mary and Virginia had the vision, and they translated that vision into a painting, which they commissioned from Victor Botkin, a fine painter who was at that point working for the Crane Foundation. He'd made a massive painting, which they called Sauk Prairie Remembered, A Vision for the Future.
It was a visual depiction of the landscape that we were envisioning for the future. And so we stood behind that vision, that image, that iconic painting, as what we wanted to do out here at Badger, restore a lot of the landscape to some of its original native habitat.
We admired these two women who so diligently hauled this gigantic painting all over southern Wisconsin. And when we asked them how they had the stamina to keep doing it, they said, "Oh, we let George do it." George was their truck. Mary and Virginia were founding members of the Alliance, and they kept saying, "Imagine, just imagine." We thank them.
The landscape of the Badger Army Ammunition Plant has obviously changed dramatically over the last 200 years. And as much as we may try, we cannot return it to that ecological condition. But what we can do, and have work to do, is to begin the process of healing, to reclaim some of the land's native diversity and ecological functioning, and just as important, to bring people together in the process.
So we're in Sumter, and in the back row is one of the old guys who lives around here. So all this talk is going on and on about Badger and its future and what's going on and things like that. So he doesn't raise his hand, but he very gently raises his voice and says, "We had a paradise here, and they took it away from us."
In 1942, the U.S. Army condemned over 10,000 acres of land owned and lived on by some 80 farm families on the Sauk Prairie in order to construct the Badger Ordnance Works, later renamed Badger Army Ammunition Plant. The farmers, many of them with roots here going back for generations, were given less than 3 months to leave their farms, pack or sell all of their possessions, and find a new life for themselves and their families somewhere else. This was devastating for many of those families, and the impact, the deep loss and anger were felt for generations.
It affected both my grandmother and my grandfather, I think, somewhat differently in losing the land. Both of them lost this dream house of their own that they had built with their own lumber in their own hands, and that was something I think they missed the rest of their lives. My grandfather, to him, it was more a loss of, he was a farmer, and this was his land that was taken away from him, and he never really got over that. I can remember as a teenager asking him why he didn't go to church, and he said, if there was a God, this would have never happened to me. And that was a strong statement for him. I mean, he never was really bitter, but that kind of told you how deeply hurt he was. For Grandma, it was much more a social thing. She missed her friends. She really, really missed the deep relationship she had with her church and with her friends that she'd grown up with on the prairie. My grandparents chose to be buried back over here, so they're buried in the cemetery on the corner of County Road Z and Highway 12, just south of the plant here.
There were lots of folks who came forward with plans for Badger. There were all kinds of proposals for a prison or a racetrack or all kinds of different ideas, reindustrializing the plant. But there was no process to help work through this. Our congressman at that time who started a process to try to solve this, but it wasn't given enough time. In my memory, I think it was originally 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and you cannot solve a complex issue like this in that short a time.
During the Klug Commission, we'd meet at Spruce Street School, and we'd talk about what we'd heard and what we liked and what we didn't like, and there was a whole lot we didn't like. We wanted to keep the industries that were developed in the communities and not have them rivaled with businesses that were developing in the Badger plant. And we also knew that if they put industry into the Badger plant, they weren't going to clean it up. So we wanted the land cleaned up.
And it was shortly after that that this loose coalition came together that we called the Community Conservation Coalition for the Sauk Prairie. This was not going to be something that people in positions of influence or authority in the state government or the federal government were going to tell us what to do. It's one that we in this community were going to generate ourselves from the bottom up.
When I was first elected to the House of Representatives, there was a lot of controversy around the future use of Badger Army Ammunition Plant. I was so pleased to be able to secure funding for a facilitated consensus process, brought all the stakeholders that we possibly could to the table, and that resulted in a vision that I think the community really embraced, that did open up the land for public use, regrowth of the prairies, foraging activities and research, things that we can prize for a long, long time to come.
A friend of mine once put it this way: we used to say it's all about the land, but it's not. It's all about the people. It would always come down to personal relationships and trying to get folks to work together. And that's been so much of our work, listening, exchanging ideas and information, exploring our shared aims, with a faith that with some creativity and flexibility, we could all work together in the same place.
The Badger Reuse Plan was signed in March 2001 by the 21 participating stakeholders. The plan provided a blueprint for Badger's future green vision. Participants included Kurt Miney, representing the coalition, future Alliance President Dave Tremble, working for Sauk County, as well as Alliance members Mike Mossman, who represented the Badger History Group, Mike Dagan, who served as the DNR Secretary's representative, and Sauk County Board member Bill Wenzel. All contributed significantly to this groundbreaking document. The reuse plan set the stage for the eventual land transfers and cleanup.
So when Badger became available, the issue was, if I want a piece of the property, the best way to have a chance at it was to find a federal sponsor for my project. So we had initially interest from the Ho-Chunk through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the federal agency, the DNR as an entity working with the Park Service, and then of course the Dairy Forage Research Center, which is part of the Department of Agriculture. So they already had essentially first dibs because they were already here and they were already a federal entity.
But to me, the most important value, and the one that really captures to me what Badger is all about, is one that came out of a statement by my friend Mike Mossman. He says, you know, let's try to turn the page here. Maybe the future uses of Badger can help us achieve reconciliation. And as soon as he said that word, I just felt something very powerful come forward. And in fact, when you read the Badger reuse plan there, it's in the plan. It's one of the core values of this vision. The future uses of the Badger Army Ammunition Plant shall contribute to the reconciliation of past conflicts.
Most all of us felt the same way in the area here, that what should have done is the families owned the ground should have been given a chance to get buy back. And as I understand it, the original contract said they would be able to, but Congress had made some ruling in the meantime that they couldn't do that anymore. I mean, not all farmers would want their land back. I mean, that was up there where the main manufacturing was, that's so ruined. I mean, what's it good for, really? As far as the prairie restoration, I mean, where they got some of the prairie over on the northeast side, that's a good place for it. We've worked land over there. That land is stony and it's not nice farmland. We were very happy that Dairy Forage Research Center got the good ag lands.
We wanted the land to bloom again, for it to come to its full potential, and also for the human community itself to be healed and bloom again. What could be a less peaceful place than a factory that is building ammunition to be blown up someplace, to kill people, to destroy things? Mennonites have a hard time with that, of course. To take a piece of land used for those purposes and move it all the way back to nature, the symbolism of that is emotionally very strong, theologically very strong. And that's one of the primary reasons that members of our church have supported the Alliance in its work.
The healing of the land is really important. It's important to see that what the use was of this property before, and at one time we all understand what the Badger ammunition plant was doing. There's a lot that needs to be changed, and these are the efforts that we want to continue to share, that it is happening, that healing is happening, that restoration is there.
The folks that came to the meetings often were the same folks, and that usually included members of the Alliance, Citizens for Safe Water Around Badger, Badger History Group, the three notable groups. And one of the things I have to say is that I believe success is 99% showing up. And I have to say that the folks on the Sauk Prairie Alliance had that stick-to-itiveness because they were always there. And that really contributed to keeping the focus on the prairie restoration and the cooperative working arrangements at the forefront of the discussions.
At the same time that the land transfer was happening, we saw the deconstruction of 1,400 buildings, the removal of infrastructure, and the beginning of addressing the contaminated soil and water. It could not have been achieved without the advocacy of groups like CSWAB, making sure that there was safe drinking water in the vicinity of the Badger Army ammunition plant. And advocacy organizations like the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance is indispensable.
To their credit, the Army stepped up, and I think we can credit Joan Kenny and Mike Sitton and the local representatives of the Army for this forward thinking, that they developed this new technique that they called wet demolition. And what that involved was essentially saturating the building with water as they systematically disassembled those buildings. And it led to the ultimate removal of nearly all 1,400 of those buildings and paved the way for transfer of the property to the state of Wisconsin and the other owners.
There had never before in U.S. history been a transfer of land from the Army to a tribal nation. And I had worked on this for literally almost 2 decades. And indeed, with the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act, we secured that land transfer finally and celebrated it quite recently.
Senator Baldwin really put her efforts where her words were and eventually worked with the National Defense Authorization Act and included language that not only returned all 1,553 acres back to the Ho-Chunk Nation, but 2 more additional things. That all of it would return to the Ho-Chunk Nation in trust status, which means it is in full jurisdiction of the Ho-Chunk Nation. It is ours, we own it. The next thing that Tammy Baldwin did was include a polluter pay provision in there, which means that any hazard mitigation and any remediation is on the federal government side, not ours. And so with the passage of the Defense Authorization Act comes a phone call from Senator Baldwin's office to my office and said, we did it. We got this land back.
Now that we have a future where we do have more than one landowner out here, It's thinking about how all of those landowners can work together across property boundaries to achieve common goals and to bring the public into that process so that they feel and can better understand sort of what our connection is as community members to this landscape.
During the time that I was president, one of our primary functions at that time in the Alliance was to have educational events for school children. To see a big yellow school bus pull up at the plant and a bunch of enthusiastic kids roll out of the door, that was, I think that was one of the more positive things that we were able to accomplish through the years.
We're committed to following the reuse ordinance. So these are things that, if that did not exist, this would not be Ho-Chunk property here today.
What Badger represents is an opportunity to think about multifunctional landscapes. So how can we do a better job of thinking about land as a place where you can produce food, you can restore wildlife habitat, you can create places where we can have groundwater recharge, carbon sequestration, trails for people to recreate. You can also explore our human history, so through all sorts of different perspectives of the different people who've lived here over time.
Eventually, something is going to be on this property to be a learning center, a place where people could find some serenity and understand the history. We have to explore certain items of reintroduction of species of plants, making sure that we have plans to mitigate any types of invasive species that could depreciate some of the value of the land, making sure that we maintain and protect the habitat of birds, migratory birds or nesting birds, and deer.
In my role as a wildlife biologist, I conducted breeding bird surveys at Badger in 1998 and documented how extremely important this landscape was to many rare grassland birds. This and my subsequent surveys led to the proclamation of Badger as a Wisconsin Important Bird Area.
It's connected to the land around it. What happens to the land around it makes a difference to what happens on that piece of land. And wildlife that uses the adjacent landscape can also use Badger and vice versa. And it makes for a more viable population of animals and plants. Peregrine falcon also wouldn't be there if it weren't for Devil's Lake, real nearby, where the cliffs occur where the peregrine nests. So it nests on the bluffs at Devil's Lake. It comes down to Badger to feed. It needs that large landscape. And that's the same with many other species. So Badger is not just an island.
Another part of the planning process that was really an important goal was to connect Devil's Lake with Lake Wisconsin. And if we were to look at the map now, you could see we did just that.
It's been exciting to work with our community to bring this trail to life. This has been a trail that's been a dream for over 30 years, but finally the pieces fell in place so that we could build the Great Sauk State Trail and connect the Wisconsin River and Sauk Prairie up to the bluffs of the Baraboo Hills and into Devil's Lake State Park. Our goal long-term is to connect all the way to the Reedsburg Trail, the 400 State Trail, which will allow us to bike or walk all the way to the Mississippi River. And then to continue our work across the Wisconsin River into Dane County, so someday you could bike or walk from the Mississippi River all the way to the Wisconsin State Capitol in Madison. One of the reasons we're excited about the Sauk Prairie Rec area and its connection to the Great Sauk State Trail is that it provides a destination. That if you're starting to bike in Sauk Prairie and you head north now into this beautiful prairie, there are trails and spaces here that you can experience that you can't experience in town. One of the things that was very important to us as we designed the amenities of the Great Sauk State Trail was making sure that there were landmarks along the way that could teach people on the trail. You can stop at these historical markers or cultural markers to read what was happening on this land, the incredible journey that this piece of land in the Sauk Prairie Recreation Area has taken over time. And so we've partnered with artists from throughout the state to put some incredible art pieces along the trail.
Can you imagine the kind of economic development, the kind of opportunity, the kind of understanding that people would have of this beautiful area, going through the Driftless area, going on the Wisconsin River, going through Badger Ordnance, where they made ammunitions for the Vietnam, World War II, and the Korean War, right here. And now we're bicycling through it. The history, the conservation, the opportunities, economic development that can take place.
trail has been a true collaboration. One of the key elements was the state asking the county to be the lead partner in the development of this trail. We've worked with Dairy Forage. We've worked with the Ho-Chunk Nation. The Ho-Chunk Nation stepped up and helped financially make segment 2, or what we're standing on today, running through the Sauk Prairie Rec area, a reality.
Part of the investment with the Great Sauk State Trail was to ensure that the Ho-Chunk Nation is able to tell its story and share its culture and share how important the land is to tribal members and to the nation itself. These interpretive panels were done specifically through Ho-Chunk Nation input to ensure that we're telling our stories to ourselves and what we believe is true and how important this land is to us. And hopefully it'll also share a lot with other people who can use the trail and understand how important land is to all of us and that it is connected in so many ways in our daily lives and what we do and who we are. What we're really excited about as well is this continued partnership with the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance and everything they've done in partnerships with the Ho-Chunk Nation. There's some really beautiful, exciting things coming. It's going to be a bomb of wildflowers out here. That's going to be an explosion of beauty along the trail that people are going to be able to see.
We have 7,400 acres of protected, mostly public land. We have Ho-Chunk Nation owns 1,550 acres. Dairy Forage owns over 2,000 acres. And the state, we as citizens of Wisconsin own 3,400 acres out here. This is our public land.
One of my roles has been to sit on the ground and pull up garlic mustard, which I'm really good at. And another has been, I believe, to speak for the voiceless, to speak for the land, to speak for the plants and the animals, their hopes and their future. Because every spring, the meadowlarks come back and they plan to make a nest and raise a family and have a fine summer.
One thing that has kept many people going, including me, is to be around other folks who have a similar vision for what could be here. It's a community vision.
I think that this is really truly a national precedent in the decommissioning of a military facility that contained 1,400 buildings, more than 100 miles of roads, dozens of miles of railway, and to envision that this could be a green landscape at some point in time. A lot of people embraced that vision, supported that vision, and that's what we've got now. The buildings have been destroyed, the roads will be removed, trails will take their place, wildlife will prosper, and this is our vision for the future.
They've never taken their eye off of what the community came together to aspire to, and now it's really happening. And I just feel so grateful because none of this can be done by single individuals. This is something that required teamwork.
The Alliance has been conducting volunteer restoration days, educational tours, and programs at Badger for decades.
Our goal is to continue to engage the community in the future conservation and care of the Badgerlands for generations to come. Do you share our vision? We're a member-based organization, and we would welcome your input and your support. New members are always welcome. Be a part of this conservation dream that is now becoming a reality.